Hi, friends. Welcome to Girls' Night. The other day, I was talking on the phone to a friend, a dear friend that I've known for years, and she said something that's been echoing in my mind ever since. She said, Steph, I've spent the last few years with my head down, just doing the next right thing. Work, kids, house, family, trying to hold everything together, keeping everyone fed, keeping the calendar straight, keeping life moving. And now, for the first time in years, things have slowed down just a little, and I feel so strange. I keep catching myself thinking, wait, what do I like to do? What even makes me happy anymore? What do I need? Who am I now that my whole life isn't in crisis mode? And I just stood there in the kitchen as I was talking to her, holding my coffee, staring out the window, thinking, yep, I've been there. Now, maybe your story doesn't look exactly like hers, but I bet you've had a version of that moment too. That moment when life quiets down just enough for you to look around and think, wait, who even am I right now? For me, the first time that happened was after a breakup. I had built my whole world around this person, our relationship, his friends, our routines. I had so completely intertwined myself with his world that when we broke up, I didn't just lose a boyfriend, I lost my whole context. And I remember thinking, who am I if I'm not his girlfriend? What do I even like? What do I do on a Saturday when it's just me? It's disorienting, isn't it? When you realize that the version of yourself that you've been living out was built around someone else's needs or someone else's expectations or even someone else's dream. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's more subtle. You blink and a decade goes by where your life was full and maybe even good, but you were so busy meeting everyone else's needs that you lost track of your own. I think this happens in so many different ways in so many different seasons. It happens after being in the thick of it with motherhood, when your days have been dictated by nap schedules and snacks and survival. It happens after a breakup when you've spent so long orbiting another person that suddenly just being yourself feels strange and new. It happens after graduation or a big career change when the road that used to be so clearly marked suddenly splits into 100 directions. It happens after burnout or a health crisis when you can't do the things that used to define you and you're not sure what's left. It happens after a big faith transition or a move or a season of loss. And sometimes it even happens after you've reached a big goal. You finally get the job or the house or the family or the relationship you prayed for, and then you think, wait, why don't I feel the way that I thought I would? In one way or another, I think almost all of us wake up at some point and realize that we've been living on autopilot, doing, performing, caring, achieving, without ever stopping to ask, who am I right now and what do I actually want? And if I'm honest, that question can feel really scary to me. Because what if you don't like the answer? Or what if you've changed more than you realized? Or what if the things that used to fit just don't anymore? It's almost easier to stay distracted, to keep scrolling or volunteering or checking boxes because at least that's what's familiar. But what I've learned, and what I'm still learning, is that losing touch with yourself doesn't mean you've failed. It just means you've been human. And the good news is, you can always find your way back. Now, before we talk about how to do that, I think it really helps to understand why this matters. Because this isn't just a self-care conversation. This isn't a take an extra bubble bath this week conversation. It's a lot bigger than that. It's about learning to build a life that actually fits you. One that feels like peace on the inside, not just like success on the outside. It's about being able to show up in your world and in your relationships as your full, honest, unedited self. So you can actually be known and loved for who you are and know and love others in return. That's what this is about. Here's just a small example of what this can look like. So when Carl and I were first married, we had a season where we just kept missing each other. Not in a big dramatic way, but in the small everyday moments. I'd be curled up on the couch holding his hand thinking, I'm showing him how much I love him. And meanwhile, he'd be unloading the dishwasher and folding my laundry. Yes, he does our laundry. Thinking, I'm showing her how much I love her. And yet both of us kept walking away from those moments feeling a little unseen and a little unloved. It wasn't because we didn't love each other. It was because we didn't understand how each of us received love. Yes, I love having my laundry done. That's amazing. But really, I feel the most loved through words of affirmation and also physical touch. Carl, on the other hand, feels most loved through acts of service and gifts. So even though we were both really trying, we were speaking completely different languages. And once we realized that, once we knew that about ourselves and about each other, everything changed. We could start finally showing love in the ways that the other person could actually feel and receive. And I think the same is true for our relationship with ourselves. If you don't know what you need, you can't give it to yourself. If you don't know what you value, you'll always feel torn. If you don't know what lights you up, life will start to feel gray, even when it looks good on paper. When you don't know yourself, you might spend years building a life that looks beautiful, but doesn't actually feel like home. You might find yourself in a relationship where you feel unseen, in a job that drains you, in a church that confuses you, or in routines that just don't fit anymore. You might keep waiting for someone else to fix it, to name what's missing, to tell you who you are, to hand you a blueprint for what comes next. But the truth is, no one else can do that for you. No one else can tell you what makes you come alive. That's your sacred work, and it's holy work. Because when you know yourself, when you know what you love, what you value, what you need, you can start building a life that fits. You can say yes to things that truly align with your heart. You can say no without guilt. You can show up more authentically in your relationships. You can create rhythms and goals that actually sustain you instead of drain you. And you can live in a way that feels like peace. But I know, getting to know yourself again can feel like this big, mysterious kind of woo-woo project, right? Like, okay, cool stuff, love the idea, where do I even start? That's where we're heading next, the how. How do we actually get to know ourselves again? Not the old version we were 5 or 10 years ago, not the one we think we should be by now, but the one who's standing right here in this current season, in this body, with this heart and these dreams and these questions. Because she's still here. Even if she's buried under years of responsibility or heartbreak or waiting or noise, she's still there. And she's worth finding again. So how do we actually do that? How do we get to know ourselves again, especially when we've changed? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at pictures of myself 5 or 10 years ago and I think she was cute, but I do not even know her anymore. First thing I want to say about that is that that's not a bad thing. That's growth. You've lived a lot of life since then. You've learned, you've healed, you've survived, you've stretched. Of course you're different. This isn't about trying to find your way back to who you used to be. This is about meeting the version of you who's standing here right now. The woman you've become when you weren't even noticing. The one who's wiser, softer, maybe a little bit more tired, but also a little bit more real. That's who we're here to reintroduce you to. And the good news is, getting to know yourself again doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming project. It's not about reinventing your whole life overnight. It's about tuning back in, learning to listen, little by little, to the quiet voice of your own soul. So I have 8 ideas for how to do this. You can use one of them, you can use all of them, you can use none of them. Take what works, leave the rest. But here's some ideas to get you started. So number 1 is slow down enough to hear yourself. The first step, and honestly, maybe the hardest, is to slow down. Because you can't reconnect to yourself in a life that's too loud to listen. I think so many of us are afraid of quiet because we don't know what might come up if we stop. But quiet isn't empty. It's full of information. It's full of all the things you haven't had time to notice. What makes you feel heavy? What makes you come alive? What's actually working in your life right now and what isn't? So maybe that means creating even just a tiny pocket of stillness in your day. A walk without a podcast, a drive without music, a morning where you drink your coffee before you look at your phone. Those tiny pauses give your soul a chance to speak up. And I'll say this, when you first start creating quiet, it might not feel peaceful. It might actually feel kind of uncomfortable at first, and that's okay. That's just the noise of everything that's been waiting for you to listen. Stick with it. Eventually, you'll start to hear the faint sound of yourself again. Okay, second thing, get curious about who you are now. Not judgmental, curious. You've changed, and that's not a bad thing, but it does mean that you have to get to know yourself the way you would a new friend. Ask questions, listen for the answers. Sometimes I'll open up a journal and ask myself things like, what brings me joy lately? What drains me? What used to make me happy that doesn't anymore? What new things have I started to love? What am I craving that I keep pushing off because it doesn't feel productive? You can even write about seasons in your life and what each version of you loved, feared, believed, needed. You'll start to notice patterns, or you'll realize you've outgrown some things, and that's okay too. One of my favorite questions to ask and answer, this practice brings me so much peace, is what season am I in right now? Because knowing that changes everything. If you're in a healing season, you don't need to be building. If you're in a growing season, you don't need to apologize for stretching. If you're in a waiting season, you don't have to pretend you're sprinting. Naming your season gives you permission to stop comparing yourself to everyone else's timeline and be where you need to be right now. Here's number 3. Reconnect with what brings you joy or peace. Once you start hearing yourself again, start following the spark. I think we underestimate how much joy teaches us about who we are. Joy isn't frivolous, it's information. So pay attention to the moments when you feel a little spark, or when your shoulders drop, or when you laugh out loud, or when something inside you whispers, oh, I missed this. That's data. That's your compass. You can also try something that I call nostalgia recon. Look back at old photos or playlists or journals from different chapters in your life. What used to feel like you? What hobbies or places or routines made you feel alive? Try reintroducing one of them this week. Not because you're trying to go back, but because those pieces can remind you of who you are at your core. You can also make a joy list. I love doing this. You can write down tiny everyday things that make you happy. The smell of rain, a favorite meal, your go-to walk, a person that makes you laugh, a playlist that always hits. When you're in a fog, pick something off of that list. Little moments of joy reconnect you to who you are. All right, so number 4 is listen to your body and emotions. Another piece of this is learning to listen to your body, because often it knows what's true before your brain even does. Your body tells you when something is right or wrong, often before our mind has time to catch up. It tenses when you're forcing yourself into something that doesn't fit. It relaxes when you're aligned. Try noticing that. When you're facing a choice, ask yourself, how does this feel in my body? Not what makes the most sense on paper, but what feels like peace. Your emotions are also incredible guides. They're not the whole truth, but they're clues. If you're angry, maybe a boundary has been crossed. If you're jealous, maybe there's a desire you haven't named yet. If you're sad, maybe something needs to be grieved before you can move forward. Getting to know yourself means becoming a student of your own signals. Okay, here's number 5. I really love this one. Let people who love you reflect you back. The truth is that sometimes we need help remembering who we are. We need people who can hold up a mirror when we've forgotten what we look like. So ask your people, when do you see me most alive? What feels most me to you? You might be surprised by their answers. Sometimes they'll say something you haven't thought of in years, something small and true, like when you're planning a trip, you're just the fullest version of yourself, or when you're writing, or when you're dancing around the kitchen, and suddenly a light goes on inside of you. Let yourself be reflected back by people who love you. And if your old circle doesn't see the current version of you, that's okay, but that might be a signal that it's time to find people who do. There is nothing more healing than being seen and known and loved. Okay, number 6 is experiment. Don't overthink it. Now, this next part is so important. You won't think your way into knowing yourself again. You'll have to live your way there. You can't journal or pray or plan your way into clarity without eventually taking action. So try things. Treat your life like a lab, not a test. Sign up for a pottery class. Try therapy. Take a solo day trip. Try cooking a new meal or rearranging your living room. Say yes to something small and random just because it sounds fun. You don't have to know what it all means. You just have to be curious. I wonder what would happen if is a much kinder question than what if I mess this up? When you give yourself permission to experiment, you get to surprise yourself. And that's where the spark usually lives. One of my favorite pictures of this process comes from the movie Runaway Bride. Do you remember that movie? Julia Roberts plays a woman who keeps getting engaged, but always bolts before the wedding. And each time she's with a new fiance, she becomes whoever that person wants her to be, even down to how she likes her eggs. With one guy, he eats them scrambled, so she eats them scrambled. Or another one likes them poached, so she likes them poached. Or with another one, it's sunny side up. And at the end of the movie, there's this quiet, beautiful scene where she's standing in her kitchen alone, and she has this whole table full of eggs that are cooked every different way, and she's tasting each one, figuring out what she actually likes for herself. I love that scene because that's what this season can look like. A long breakfast table full of possibilities. You don't have to know right away. You just have to be willing to try a few things. Pay attention to what feels like you and let the rest go. All right, here's number 7. Reintroduce yourself to yourself. Once you've started listening, reflecting, and experimenting, you can start reintroducing yourself to yourself. You can literally write it down, like, "Hi, I'm Steph. Right now, I'm learning how to slow down. I love time outside. I need quiet mornings. I care deeply about helping women live honestly. I'm craving community. I'm tired, but I'm hopeful. And, here's what I know about myself right now." You can do this every few months or however often you want, but it's such a grounding exercise and you'll see yourself evolving in real time. You can also make a playlist or a Pinterest board or even just a folder on your phone that feels like you right now. The colors, the quotes, the songs, the textures. It's visual proof of your identity in motion. And sometimes it's even as simple as rearranging your space. That's something that can really help. Donate the things that no longer feel like you and add something that reflects who you're becoming. Your external space can mirror your internal one. And when it does, it's really powerful. All right, here's the last one. Give yourself time and grace. This isn't a quick makeover. It's a relationship. You didn't lose yourself overnight, and you won't rediscover yourself overnight either. This is slow work, sacred, lifelong work. Think of it like rebuilding a friendship with yourself. You're learning to listen again, to trust again, to believe that your voice matters. There's no rush. There's no perfect version of you that you have to find. There's just you, changing, growing, healing, becoming. And honestly, I think that's the most beautiful part. Because the goal isn't to get back to the old you. The goal is to meet the truest you, the one who's been here all along, waiting patiently for you to come home. I think about my friend's words all the time now. She didn't say it like a confession or a breakdown. She said it like a woman waking up. And I think that's what's happening for so many of us right now. We're waking up to our own lives again. We're remembering that we have permission to change. We're realizing that the most important relationship we'll ever have after God, but before anyone else, is the one that we have with ourselves. Because when you know who you are, you can finally show up in the world with intention. You can love people without losing yourself. You can dream without apologizing. You can walk into a room and not shapeshift to fit in. because you already belong. This is so important. It's not just a self-reflection exercise or a bubble bath or just a little bit of self-care. What's at stake here is your whole life. If you don't know who you are, it's nearly impossible to live with integrity, to make decisions that actually line up with what you believe, value, and were created for. When you don't know yourself, you can spend years running on autopilot, living someone else's dream, serving out of guilt instead of calling, saying yes when you mean no. You can lose your peace, your joy, your voice, even your closeness with God because you're so busy being who you think you're supposed to be that you stop showing up as the person He actually made you to be. But when you do know yourself, you live from alignment instead of approval. You build your life, your faith, and your relationships on honesty instead of performance. And that changes everything. And that's what I want for you. Not perfection, not certainty, just presence. I want you to feel at home in your own skin again. I want you to trust yourself enough to follow the small nudges, to laugh at what's funny, and to rest when you're tired, and to cry when you need to, and to know that it all counts as being alive. So maybe this week the invitation is simple. Take one quiet walk. Ask one honest question. Try one tiny thing that sparks joy. And just start listening. Because underneath all the noise and all the roles and all the expectations, she's still there. You're still there. And you're so worth knowing. Friend, thank you so much for being here at Girls Night. I am loving this season of our show. And I will see you next week for another episode.